Hey there, and welcome to TYT's Reporting In. This is our show dedicated to investigative journalism, to reporting. We talk to reporters who are out in the field working on stories, who are pounding the pavement, working those Freedom of Information Act requests to get the investigative stories that you want to hear about and need to hear about that help our democracy thrive to the extent that it does. And today I have a return guest. I'm excited to talk to him. Which of the Krassenstein brothers are you?
I'm the third one.
The third one. No, it's not a Krassenstein brother. It's Ken Klippenstein, and he works for TYT Investigates. He also works for the Daily Beast, correct?
Yeah.
Right, for the Daily Beast and for TYT Investigates. And you've been blowing up, Ken. I got to be honest with you. Lately, the past couple months, you have been on fire. You're doing great stories and great work. And I know that the TYT, not only are we covering your stories on the main show here at TYT, but your stories are also getting into other mainstream or traditional media news organizations are promoting them. So kudos to you and congratulations for your hard work and for all that success. We're gonna talk about that. Where are you coming to us from today?
I'm in Madison, Wisconsin.
Madison, Wisconsin. Are you headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin, or are you there just for today?
No, I live here.
So that's your thing. I'm, as you can see here in lovely Los Angeles. It's a beautiful day. It's the weather's the same as it was the last time we did a show together, which is nice. And apparently so is the traffic. Anyway, so what I wanted to talk to you today first about is the most recent story you did for TYT Investigates that got a fair amount of press, and that was about the Homeland Security, I guess. And you can correct me if I get wrong, is now has a grant for a program to train high school or school-age children in applying tourniquets and stanching bleeding and basically doing sort of triage in preparation for shooting events at schools. And so tell me about how this story came about. How did you find out about this story to even know to look into it and to ask about it? So where give me the backstory on this a little bit.
Well, I know a number of people in the Department of Homeland Security, and I should point out that a lot of them are sort of distraught at the direction that it's taking. And these are not left-wing individuals by any means. And one of them tipped me off to the fact that there was a federal contract out for exactly what you describe. A program that would train high school students. The plan is to train them all across the country in how to stop children from bleeding out in the event of mass shootings. And what was shocking to me investigating that story was that it's kind of gotten to the point that we're not even pretending like we're going to stop the shootings anymore. We're just going to teach kids to adapt to them, which seemed kind of horrifying to me.
Right. So it seems to me like this is an issue where there's recognition at higher levels of Homeland Security or in the government, the federal government, that these are a problem and they need to be perceived as doing something about it. One way they're perceived or they act like they're doing something about it is talking about furnishing guns to teachers, which is the latest Betsy DeVos program, which she was widely excoriated for, and rightfully so. I don't know if there's progress on that. But is that is that your sense of what's motivating this? Is that they feel like they have to do something, and so it is something. It's not nothing. It's a terrible, terrible idea, and it speaks very ill of us as a society. But it is something.
I absolutely agree. I mean, they're under enormous pressure. For whatever reason, the Parkland shooting generated an unusual amount of not just public indignation, but even engagement in terms of the students going out and demonstrating. I didn't see any of that, and I haven't seen any of that in a lot of the other shootings. And so I think that, sort of brought a lot of pressure to bear on not just the Trump administration, but on politicians. You see, Marco Rubio having to address students and talk to people. And I hadn't seen those things with a lot of the shootings. So then they have to produce something, and what are they going to produce? Well, they can't, produce any gun control because of their, political constituencies. So what do they have left? I mean, they could do mental health stuff, which I also think would be constructive, and that's not necessarily a gun control thing. They're not going to do that because they don't want to spend money on anything. Very averse to social spending. They'll spend on other things. So what do they have left? And we get these preposterous ideas that, experts have derided and just common sense would dictate aren't going to work, like arming teachers and, having security guards everywhere, basically turning it into, I don't know, Jordan or the Palestinian territories or something. Much of the public polling shows horrified by these proposals. So I don't know how much they'll come to pass, or if they even can pass legal muster. But I really think that was the origins of this plan.
And so where you initially published this, where was this in the Daily Beast and on TYT Investigates, or
no? This was just TYT Investigates.
And then eventually it got picked up by other outlets. How has that happened to you before, or was this a new experience for you having your work picked up by more mainstream news media?
This wasn't the first time. I've had stuff picked up by major media plenty of times in the past, but this was the first time in terms of just I feel like magnitude. Perhaps it was right after it was in the New York Times. It was just everywhere. Everyone was talking about it, and I'm overjoyed by that because, believe it or not, us reporters aren't by and large in it for the money. We'd like to have some kind of effect, and to see everyone discussing it, and just coming to terms with the fact that the government is kind of giving up on stopping the shootings in major respects. That was very gratifying to see. But I think also I mentioned before that I'm in Madison. Part of that has been, since I do a lot of national level work, national security work in particular, I've had to use the phone and social media a lot to meet people, since I'm not, by the same cafes and things that they hang out at. And because of that, Twitter has been very kind to me in terms of boosting my stories and getting them to have a certain profile. So I think that probably played at least as big of a role in its popularity as the quality of the story was just, social media helping to boost it.
And I should note that, or give you a little props there on Twitter. You're on Twitter a lot, and you're a quality follow. I highly recommend to everybody definitely follow Ken, and his Chiron soon has come up, and you'll see it. But it's Ken Klippenstein, if you can figure out how to spell it, and find him on Twitter.
Probably the only one.
And not just for the stories you're covering, which is worthwhile, but you also you're snarky and funny and entertaining. So it's worth it for that reason. I mean, just on a day. Today, the day as we're taping this is the day that I guess the Texas GOP has come out and trying to discredit Beto O'Rourke by implying that he earlier in his life he was young and attractive and in a band, and nobody in America is going to want to have anything to do with a guy like that, right? Meanwhile, a video of Ted Cruz looking like a lump on the basketball court has also emerged. So it's like, how can you resist Twitter on a day like that? But we could talk about that in a moment. But I want to get back to this. So the New York Times picks up your story. It gets everywhere. What was the response? Generally, was it the same in what you saw on Twitter, or people commenting on the story in the New York Times, wherever? Did they have the same take, which is, this is giving up. We're giving up. We're just saying our children are going to be massacred, and maybe we can stem the bleeding literally and figuratively, but we're not going to stop it.
Oh yeah, the response was just shock and horror. I saw almost no, even conservatives weren't. It seemed like they chose to just not talk about it rather than say that it was bad. And I got a number of messages via email, Twitter direct messages from parents that were just saying, "I'm scared. What do I do? I don't want the country to go in this direction." And, kind of trying to explain to them, how you can get sort of involved with things. There's a bunch of different ways. But, that was hard to see. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine the stress that one would feel seeing that the state is essentially giving up on the safety of your kids, and it's just going to try to minimize the damage that they've accepted as the new normal, I think.
And it seems like that's not yes, on the one hand, we do have the issue that they feel they need to appear to be doing something, but it seems the more pernicious side of it is that the unwritten or the unspoken aspect of this is to suggest that school shootings are just like natural disasters. I mean, like, you would train people what to do in a natural disaster potentially. If you're grow up in California, you're given earthquake training and so on and so forth. And so, but once people start to lump in school shootings with earthquakes and hurricanes and tornadoes, that there's nothing to be done about them, and we just have to understand they're going to happen, and you never know when it's going to strike. There's no warning, and then once it passes into that public consciousness, then it becomes all the more difficult to do anything about guns and the proliferation of guns and mental illness and the other issues that may also be legitimate that don't have to do with eliminating guns specifically. So, I mean, is that part of the motivation, or is that just an outgrowth, or am I wrong?
Well, I should say that was probably the only criticism that I saw in any serious, numbers was people saying, "Wait, but this is good that they're getting this training." And I should say I agree. It's great that kids are getting, any kind of safety training they can. But it's the idea that this is in lieu of attempting to address the cause rather than the symptoms that bothers people. And I saw a number of people convey that idea. They're saying, no, I'm not against kids knowing basic safety measures that can work for a number of things, car accidents, like anything else that might happen. But it's the idea that this is all that this administration has produced in response to what is really an epidemic and something that's not happening in any other comparable country.
Right. And I mean, yeah, of course, who's going to object to first aid training in general?
Yeah.
But it wouldn't just be someone, how do you deal with someone who's got a gaping bullet wound? There'd be all sorts of, the Heimlich maneuver, or what, I know the Heimlich maneuver is sort of, but all sorts of first aid training and CPR and all that sort of thing. It would be worthwhile to teach kids that, but that's not really what this is it?
No, and I had a number of soldiers and EMTs reach out to me and saying it's gonna be very limited what a child who's not developed, psychologically or even physically is gonna be able to do in a high stress situation. I mean, I had soldiers say that they had to, put down bleeding of, people that they had served with. They said it's an extraordinarily stressful, traumatic situation. And, it's no reflection of the kid's weakness. It's just they're not developed. Like they seem very skeptical that kids would be able to, really do a whole lot in a situation like that, even with training.
Well, that's what we call the soft bigotry of low expectations, Ken. As we learned from
I don't be ageist.
from Sacha Baron Cohen, the right wing believes in our children. They believe that kindergartners should be armed and can be trained to handle. So if a kindergartner
it was insane. My story came out like 1 week before that, and then everyone, or about the same time, I think, and then everyone was cross-referencing like, "Is this real now? Like, where is it? It's not humor anymore." It was so bizarre, and I know. The word surreal gets used a lot in this administration, but it was just bizarre.
Well, there's one other aspect about this that I want to ask you about. Maybe this is just I'm overthinking it, but the reality is that school shootings, despite how often they happen in the United States, compared to the rest of the world, they happen a lot more frequently. But realistically, your chances of being involved in a school shooting are astronomically small. And so to do this kind of training, it's like going after a in-person voter fraud when the cases of the likelihood of someone committing in-person voter fraud are like the same chance of getting hit by lightning or whatever. But if you have this sort of widespread training the point is you don't want your kids to suffer this kind of trauma and be exposed to this sort of thing. And this is one way you can minimize it a little bit, at least the damage, and possibly save lives. But the reality, it seems to me, is if you're rolling out this training across the board to kids across the country and in schools everywhere, then that's part of the traumatization process by saying, look, kids, you need to be trained in case one of your classmates gets shot by a gun. Even if they're never anywhere near a school shooting, now you're pre-traumatizing these kids in ways that is wholly unnecessary. Is that part? Was that raised? Was that question raised also, or am I sort of talking out of turn a little bit?
Yes, people brought that up. They thought that it's kind of unseemly that these young children, as young as like 13 years old, are going to have to think about their peers, bleeding out in front of them, and have to do these things on dummies and think about this stuff. But you make a good point. I mean, there's far greater threats to children's safety. One would be climate change. Another, you can just go down the list.
Right. And
it's important. I mean, the nature of these shootings, it does, it makes sense to me that people are shocked and horrified, and it has a sort of element that, it goes viral very easily because everyone, they want to see kids getting hurt. But if you just look at the numbers, it's not one of the primary threats to youth safety. And I'm sure there are plenty and even in this country. So.
Yeah. What about, is there, I know the ultimate goal of any investigative journalist when they report on a story and they uncover a story is to achieve social change. And one outlet or one possibility for this would be that the Homeland Security rethinks this. Is there any question that might happen, or are they moving full steam ahead despite these revelations?
I haven't seen anything from them. To my knowledge, they didn't make a public statement in response to it, which very often is because, they just hope it'll blow over. But the magnitude of the story, I was surprised that they didn't say anything. I wonder if they just, were hoping to pretend that it hadn't happened. I wouldn't be surprised if they still are going ahead with it, though, just because no one pays much attention to these things. And that's really why I've gone into investigative reporting. The nature of the written reporting now. A lot of it is aggregation and reprinting things, and that's not the reporter's fault. That's sort of the economy of the press now. But a negative consequence of that, a byproduct of that to the news readers, you don't get exposed to a whole lot of new stuff. So when I hear these things, and even when I go over open record stuff, very rarely has anyone else requested the same thing I did. It's not a matter of laziness. It's just there's a lack of resources to go after these things. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Department of Homeland Security is just going to sort of count on, the hope that no one will follow up and look into it.
Yeah,
which will be to their detriment, because I will.
Well, that's certainly a possibility. They could also scuttle it, and it's not like they're going to, issue a press release if they do. But it's also a situation where people are going to be aware of this happening, because if they're training kids in the schools, the kids are going to tell their parents, and their parents are going to say, "What the hell is this?" Even if they didn't hear the original story. So it's not something you can just sort of do and keep under wraps. So hopefully, if they do proceed with it, the uproar will not die down. Will still be, there will be people who are going to push back against it, and depending on what happens with, not only this election but 2020, maybe we can see some things change on that. But so we'll hope for that, and we can monitor that, and we'll have you on in the future again, and you can update us if there is anything. So I wanted to move on and talk about a couple of other things that are in the news this week that I thought you might have an interesting take on. First of all is the recent death of John McCain. You pro or con?
Oh my God. He was conservative, con, I guess. So how about that?
I don't know. I saw a lot of Democrats really talking about how wonderful he was and what a great guy he was, and how he was a warrior for peace and a thoughtful, considerate, and just a lion of the Senate. So I don't know where you're getting this con stuff. The only people who really hate him, seems to me, are the people on the right.
So we talked about before about how much I'm on Twitter. I'm very addicted to Twitter. You'll look at the day that he passed away and the day after. I was basically absent, and that's very unusual for me. The reason for that is because my mother told me, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. That was kind of the approach that I took to his passing. That's
I agree with you. If people who knew him want to say positive things about him, it's understandable. But the fawning over him in the press for a lot of people in the press was really disgusting.
You don't have to lie. I mean, okay, you don't have to, say something that's going to hurt the family's feelings or something, but you also don't have to say clearly disingenuous things about, and if you want to talk about respect, that's patronizing to, say, oh yeah, wasn't he great? He really did all this wonderful stuff that in fact he didn't. So, we're totally on the same page there.
Yeah, but I did find it a little disgusting, and admittedly, I'm not. I don't want to. It's interesting that the people on the left who were objected to what McCain was about, for the most part, were different. They had different issues with McCain than the people on the far right, the Trumpists, who he didn't have enough respect for Donald Trump.
I suspect that Trump is more, or that McCain received more accolades from liberals than he did from Republicans, and that was sort of odd to me, given his voting record was, just in almost every case, overwhelmingly partisan. So I don't know, that was kind of funny, because if you look at a lot of the Trump people, they despised him. I saw the right-wing political cartoonist Ben Garrison had a picture of his head literally bursting in blood, I think, trying to show the tumor in his head. And this was, I don't remember what website it was on, but he's a widely followed right-wing figure. I wouldn't be surprised if
it sounds hilarious. I love a good political cartoon. It sounds really. I would laugh and laugh at that. It sounds like, no, yeah. They were really, but their criticism. Well, we don't have to get into it too much, but it is an interesting phenomenon, the way people respond when someone, a political figure, dies, and that John McCain, you would never be able to guess his voting record from the way people responded to him. That he was a loyal and dedicated Republican who voted down the line almost universally with Republicans, but he had a couple of areas where he stepped out of line, and that's just not allowed on the right. But on the left, we allow it all the time, which is the crazy
liberals
thing.
Seem to have some affection for him for criticizing Trump, but what policies did he criticize? He mostly seemed to criticize him on decorum, on presentation, and I don't know how honorable that is, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, his issues with Trump seem to be entirely about superficial matters and not about substance. So, but that is that he's in line with almost all Republicans. Jeff Flake, even all the Republicans who are critical of Donald Trump. Most of them they just think he's crass and they don't like him because he's not part of their club and he doesn't act like it. But anyway, well, John McCain. So So you said you were pro his death?
I said he was con.
Yeah,
he was a con. He's a conservative.
You refused to answer. I understand. Your mother's policy. All right, we only have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to ask you one other thing that happened today that was interesting is with the New York governor's race. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but Andrew Cuomo is in the polls, still running well ahead of his challenger Cynthia Nixon, but today it was revealed that his campaign took $25,000 from Harvey Weinstein or from somebody associated with Harvey Weinstein or his organization, and soon thereafter, the investigation into Harvey Weinstein was dropped. And Andrew Cuomo has a lot of negatives for Democrats. He's propped up Republicans so that they didn't have to, he couldn't get his alleged agenda passed with the IDC. He's been very pro oil and gas industry. I mean, he's a real sort of corporatist Democrat, and he's been corrupt. There's examples of corruption that are outrageous, but it's all sort of flowed off of his back like water off a duck's back. But I wonder if you think this is at all different. Like Harvey Weinstein is so poisonous, and that he might get caught up not in the Me Too movement for doing something personally, but for being an enabler of Harvey Weinstein. Is that likely to hold, or is this just going to be tomorrow? It's the news cycle has moved on, and we're going to ignore that.
Well, I certainly hope that he's held to account for that, but it should be noted that his opponent is LGBT. She's a woman. And when you look at major press, they seem to forget a lot of these qualities and how novel and, in my opinion, exciting it would be to have someone like that. So I wonder if in that same fashion, they're just going to paper over what this says about, what this potentially says about his position on women's rights and holding people accountable. So I tend to feel pessimistic about that. But I've been wrong before. I've certainly been wrong about the elections yesterday. I'll tell you that much.
Oh, really? What was your where were you off the mark?
Well, particularly the governor's race in Florida. I mean, we have someone who's been very vocal about Medicare for all, won the primary against corporate-backed candidates who seemed, in my opinion, like they were going to easily win, and he won it. He's talking about raising corporate taxes. The corporate class seems furious at him. He seemed like an underdog to me, but I was totally wrong about that. I was wrong about Ocasio-Cortez winning. So I wouldn't take I'm just a reporter. I'm not a polls analyst or anything like that. So I wouldn't take that to the bank.
None of us are prognostic. Look, I say it repeatedly. In the beginning of 2016, I was saying Scott Walker was going to be the Republican nominee. So
right.
What I don't know either. But what I think will be, we were almost out of time. But one thing that I think will be interesting to watch in Florida, particularly, is now that Ben Jealous in Maryland is the Democratic nominee, and there are Democrats, sort of centrist, moderate, corporatist Democrats, who are running away from Ben Jealous and saying they're not going to support him. Whether that's going to happen in Florida as well. One difference being that in Maryland, the current governor, the Republican governor, is sort of seen as a moderate. So the sort of centrist Democrats can feel like they're more aligned with him. In Florida, we got a rabid right winger in DeSantis and a avid, he's a Trump guy. So that's not the same dynamic. But he is going to be supporting the corporatist agenda, just like Donald Trump does. So it'll be interesting to see whether Gillum gets the full support of the Florida Democratic Party, or if many elements among Florida Democrats decide they're not going to support him because they're afraid of him.
Yeah, that will be interesting to see. There does seem to, once he's won the primary, I wonder how important the backing of the party leadership is at some point, because these candidates, they have a lot of popularity among the grassroots, and so their constituency doesn't necessarily have to be party leadership in the same way that a more traditional candidate amenable to, poor corporate policies might be. So I don't know that it'd be so pessimistic about that. There are Democrats who've ran saying that they oppose Nancy Pelosi, and that helps them. I don't follow electoral stuff very closely, but I would say things are up for grabs right now. I've been just upset after upset. It seems like it's hard to tell where things are going to go. Yeah, well, Florida will certainly be an interesting state to watch. It's always an important state, not only for these races, but as a bellwether for 2020. Right. All right, well, Ken Klippenstein,
or so you say, allegedly not really a Krassenstein. I don't actually even know who they are, but I know you get confused for them.
That's probably best. You don't want to. No, you don't want to learn who they are.
Okay.
Just you're good.
Okay. Ignorance is bliss in that regard. But
exactly.
but I appreciate all the information you've been sharing with us and what you do for TYT Investigates. Ken Klippenstein, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you folks at home also watching. This has been Reporting In, the only TYT show that is dedicated to investigative journalism. It's for members. Members get to see it first before the general public. And thank you all to my crew as well, for Skip and Craig, who helped me out today. And I hope you'll tune in next time on Reporting In.